We're expecting some more people, so they'll get in where they fit in. Hello again, everybody. My name is Wylea Chase. I am the Director of Partnerships and Corporate Engagement at Leadership Montgomery. I'm trying not to just be ahead. So thank you again, everybody, for coming to the first in our Business in Action series. We're going to be talking about the importance of corporate social responsibility, why it's important, why it's still important. And our guest panelists today are Jerome Tennille and Toni Stiefel. Toni Stiefel is the Impact Advisor at the Fehlig Group. Toni built her career at large multinational corporations and joined the Fehlig Group in 2009 as a meaningful way to combine her professional skills with her desire to make the world a healthier, more just place. As an impact advisor for the small local woman-owned consultancy firm, Toni helps businesses of all sizes align their values with internationally recognized sustainable and responsible business standards. And what is also very important to note is that she is an LM graduate of 2009, class of 2009. Do you have anything to plug in there, Toni? You all have your different, 2020 is the best or whatever. Do you have any taglines for 2009 class?
We have a very resilient group. The year that we went through our group, we all had a lot of family changes, and we became our own little family. And I think that was a really bonding experience for all of us. So we all stay kind of close, and awesome. That means a lot.
Awesome, thank you. And Jerome Tennille. Jerome has close to 10 years in the social impact space. He is the manager of social impact and volunteerism for Marriott International. Prior to Jerome's work with Marriott International, he held the position of senior manager of impact analysis and assessment for Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, TAPS, a national nonprofit organization that offers help, hope, and healing to all those grieving the death of a loved one serving in America's armed forces. Jerome holds a Master's of Sustainability Leadership, MSL, from Arizona State University. He is designated as certified in volunteer administration and is also a veteran of the U.S. Navy. Thanks for joining us, Jerome.
Glad to be here.
So we're going to get started with our conversation, but first I want to talk to the audience real quick and want to ask you all, we're going to do a poll, and Allison is going to put that up for us. And the poll question is, do you have a CSR program in place in your organization? Do you have a corporate social responsibility program in place at your organization? And Allison is going to put that poll up for us. And while she's doing that, thank you for those who have just joined. You are in the right place if you're here for the first in our series in our Business in Action discussion on corporate social responsibility today. All right, here's the poll. Do you have a CSR program in place at your organization? I'm not a host, so I can't see.
So we have 10 people that have answered. Actually, we're at 60%. Maybe we'll do 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so Jerome and Toni, 73% of our audience do not have a CSR program at their organization or where they work. What do you think about that?
It reminds me of a manager that I worked for a number of years ago, and I told him that I felt we really needed to implement a corporate responsibility program at our organization. And his answer was, we're not a corporation, so we can't do that. And knowing that there's a lot of nonprofits on this call, I think that it's important for people to understand what corporate responsibility is. The word corporate is in it just to recognize business versus personal, but what it really means is 3 things. It's investing in employees, it's dealing fairly and ethically with your suppliers, and it's supporting the communities that you live and work in. And incorporated in that is environmental protection. So any organization, any business organization can support those things. You don't have to be a corporation to have a corporate responsibility program. And I think the other interesting thing is that probably a lot of these organizations are very corporately responsible, but they don't realize it. And sometimes you're doing things that you just do as good business practice, or it's just who you are, but you don't have it under the umbrella of a program.
And and to really add on that, and I think you touched on something that I think is incredibly important. It's how we talk about CSR, corporate responsibility. I think there are a lot of different terms that float around that people don't necessarily identify themselves with. And I think corporate social responsibility or corporate citizenship, corporate philanthropy, all these different terms have the word corporate, when in reality, it's just doing responsible business. And I think, that's a phrase that I try to use more often, because I think the idea of doing business responsibly, socially, environmentally, is not relegated to corporations. When you look at all the different businesses that exist here in America, it's like less than 1% of the businesses that exist are large corporations. And so, the other 99% might not identify with corporate social responsibility, but doing business more responsibly, I think, is something that most people, whether they're at a small or medium-sized business, can really identify with. And I would also say that, just like Toni mentioned, the idea of doing business responsibly, as it relates to your own employees or the environment, or just being more socially conscious, is not it's not limited to just for-profit companies, right? In a pre-COVID world, we had 1.5 million tax-exempt organizations here in America. And what I would say is that, and this might be a controversial thing to say, but nonprofit organizations are not socially or environmentally responsible by default just because they are mission-driven. And that's something that I firmly believe. And I think words matter. And so talking about it as responsible business, I think, is the more responsible thing to do, because I think most people can really identify that with that, even if they don't have a structured program.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. That's important to note. You're talking about, we're getting into what corporate social responsibility means, right? And that there are, like you said, Jerome, different terms and, different ways that it's expressed by different organizations, nonprofit businesses alike. But what is the corporate social responsibility, right? Some people think it's just volunteering. We're volunteering, we're doing stuff, that's it, right? Some people think it's all about just the surrounding community, or maybe not about the surrounding community. So what would you say? And Jerome, we can start with you. What would you say, what is corporate social responsibility?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about sort of like a very basic definition, and then what that really, what it really means, right? So it's like the self-regulated practice that a business takes on to be more socially or environmentally responsible, right? That's simply what it is a very basic definition. But I always try to tell people to think more broadly about what it is to do business more responsibly, right? It's not relegated to just volunteerism and grant giving. While those are two different components, we also have to think about employee well-being and health. We also have to think about supplier diversity. We also have to think about things like labor and human rights, and what that means for our supply chain, or even the products that we are creating, and the messaging and the marketing behind those products, and what that's communicating or maybe influencing within society. I'll share a couple of different local examples here in Montgomery County, because I think COVID-19, what I've seen is that businesses have really expanded that idea of what responsible business is. For example, even before the Defense Production Act was enacted here in America, there were local businesses, right? Like, for example, was it Twin Valley Distillers? They pivoted from making whiskey and beer to making hand sanitizer, right? And we saw companies pivot to making PPE and ventilators, even before there was any sort of mandate for companies to do that. And so just the simple idea of doing something that benefits society and the environment, I think we have to start thinking about, how we're more responsible in that regard, even if it's more broad than giving your time or monetary donations.
Right. Thank you for that. What would you say, Toni?
Yeah, I would add to that too, that it's a lot about how you treat your employees and your customers and your community. Uh, Thinking about the past couple months with COVID, when you look at the way businesses that had essential employees were treating them, were they providing them with PPE? Were they making their stores safe? Were they allowing people to have time off? Were they asking them to work overtime? If people had pre-existing conditions, were they able to not come in? Were they forced to come in? Were they given days off? Were they given paid time off? Those things became highly relevant during COVID-19. And it's a huge part of your corporate responsibility, your responsible business practices. Being ethical means supporting the people who work for you. You wouldn't have a business and organization without the people that support it. So that's a huge part. And then what are you doing for the community? I mean, you look at an organization like Jose Andres' restaurants. They did a lot to supply food for essential workers, for people who couldn't afford food. They talk about pivoting, they were losing business, but they still employed their people to provide services for the community and people who really needed it. So they did a dual operation of giving employment to their staff and then helping the people who needed the food that they were producing. So there's really a great mix of internal and then external to what you can do for your organization. One of the things that I remember someone telling me many years ago, before corporate responsibility was kind of a buzz phrase, someone called it being a good neighbor. And that's always stuck with me. You want to be a neighbor of choice, somebody that people want to live next to, want to be part of your community. And to take it a step further, that I know we'll talk about a little bit more, if you're a good neighbor, people remember that. And when something bad happens and you need people to rally around you, they remember when you were there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. My grandfather used to call it putting good favor in the bank. And you have something to deposit from later. You're not starting from scratch and trying to ramp your way up. It's already there. It's already available to you because you've been that person for other people, right? So yeah, I agree with that. And I'm thinking back to something that you said also, Jerome, and you too, Toni, about sort of it reminds me of sort of starting at home, right? You start, if your foundation is good, your organization is good, if your employees are good, right, then you are good to serve out, to give that goodness, to serve that sort of, in that sort of way out into the community. And that makes me think of our leadership in action offerings at Leadership Montgomery. We have a number of different programs, workshops, trainings for people who are trying to grow within their own organizations. So, we have our professional development offerings and things like that, that are also a part of giving to your employees and helping them in their growth, and then, you also alluded to the fact that, I think you did, Toni, the fact that companies don't call these things programs necessarily, but they have these things already in place. This is something that I touch on and talk about with our employee volunteer jumpstart programs, right? And helping companies to develop and design their CSR programs or to implement them. And what we start with is the fact that your employees are probably already volunteering somewhere. They're probably already giving of their time and talents somewhere individually, but this is something that maybe you want to make a mandate as a company, right? You want it to be known that your company cares about the community. And so you're embarking on this journey of corporate social responsibility in all aspects. And then that's when I get the opportunity to talk about all the things that we have to offer at Leadership Montgomery, that I touched on here. But so can you talk about why it's still important, that it is still a thing, corporate social responsibility, employee engagement and community engagement is still a thing. It hasn't gone anywhere, and why it's still important. Toni?
We'd like to say at the Fehlig Group that consider what's important to the people that are important to you. So who's important to you as an organization? Your customers or your clients? your suppliers, your community, the people who work for you. What matters to them? What matters to them is a lot of the things that we've been talking about. So you can explore what those are and how you can influence some of those things, how you can make a difference, because it, as you said, you put the capital in the bank. But also, we're at a stage where people are demanding it. Customers are demanding it. Employees are demanding it. You've heard a lot in the news about Amazon and some of the tech companies, employees just walking out. They're not putting up with companies saying one thing and doing another. They want to work for an organization that they can be proud of. Communities are pushing back on businesses that aren't supporting them, that are always looking outside to bring in people or to sell their services. So whereas before, I think, a number of years ago, people expected kind of the government or social services, nonprofits to do a lot of services for the community and for people. And whether that should have happened or was happening or is happening, people are saying it's not happening enough. So who's going to pick up the slack? And businesses are doing that. People are demanding it. They don't want to work for companies that don't. They don't want to buy from companies that don't. They don't want those companies in their neighborhoods or building in their towns if they're not going to be supportive. So one of the things that we talk about in this field a lot is what we call ESG, environmental, social, and governance aspects. And that's what investors often are looking at. But if you look at those particular three areas, people say, what are you going to do, corporations? How are you going to pick up the slack in this? And how are you going to make it happen?
Absolutely. Yes. Jerome, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, Toni, she hit the nail right on the head. I think more so now than ever before are people using their purchase power to buy goods and services from companies that they believe are socially and environmentally responsible, that align with their core values as a person. And so, companies that don't abide by society's definitions of good, bad, responsible, irresponsible, are going to go the way of the dodo. They're going to be hit financially. But I think even beyond that, even what Toni said, it's people are expecting that companies are taking a stance on things that the customer and employee care about. One of the reasons that I got into the work that I do is because I fundamentally believe that some of the greatest change that I see in my lifetime will be through more purposeful capitalism. And like, for me, it's like, I want to be a part of that, and I want to be able to change that, because I do see that more, when they choose to work for a company or an employer, when they walk into their place of business, they're bringing their full selves to work, right? Like when I go to Marriott International, I walk through those doors, I bring my values, and it's incredibly important that as an employee, my values are also reflected in the values of the place that I work. And I know that our core values speak to me. They speak to me as a man of color. They speak to me as a veteran of the military. And, some of our core values include serve our world and put people first. And that's really important to me. And I suspect that with younger generations now in the workforce, that is becoming incredibly more important, that, people are also aligned with companies that they believe, that are responsible.
Yes, absolutely. Can you both give some high-level advice to companies who want to begin their corporate social responsibility journey?
Yeah, and this is something that I feel very, very personal about. I always start with the needs of the community first and foremost. I think, so when I was in the military, when we would deploy, I was an intelligence analyst for 8 years. And before we would deploy into any operating environment, we would do a practice, and it was called intelligence preparation of the operating environment. And so we would go in there, we'd figure out what is the geopolitical situation, what's the climate, what's the terrain, what are adversaries' capabilities, limitations, our own capabilities and limitations as a military. And you would study everything there was to know about that environment. Businesses need to do the same in terms of the social and the social and the natural capital environment that they're operating in. And the first thing I say is take your cues from the community. I think too often I've seen that companies, they have a different expectation sometimes that are driven by the brand's needs, right? Or sometimes the needs or the expectations, I should say, of their employees, and sometimes the expectations of their employees or the expectations of what might look more favorable for the brand, they ignore the actual need in a community that needs to be addressed. And I always say that if you start by taking the cues from the community and figuring out what the critical needs are first and foremost, and then after that, aligning what your internal resources are, materialistically, monetarily, and with human capital, find where those two things intersect. That's where you're going to find that sweet spot.
Absolutely. Yes. I don't want to take us off track. So, if I were at a poetry reading, Jerome, and you had just said what you said, I'd be doing this. Absolutely. I agree. Go ahead, Toni.
I like that. I think we should do that anyway. We like to start with particularly our smaller customers in terms of tell us who you are and we'll meet you where you're at. So giving a real world example, we work with a construction company. And if you were to meet someone from this construction company, you say, well, what do you guys do? Well, we're a construction company. We build buildings. We work with big customers to renovate offices or whatever it may be. And we worked with them for a little bit. And now when they describe who they are, and I'm going to read this, we are a woman-owned small business and a great community partner. We are our second year certified as a green business. In the last 3 years, we've been certified as a great place to work. We've met our environmental targets year after year. And the last 2 years, we've been nominated one of the community's healthiest employers. And we also do construction. So it's a difference of really looking at who you are. And as Jerome mentioned, what are your values? You have your brand, that's your marketing brand. And that talks about kind of what you do, but brand who you are and look at some of the things that you do. Goes back to what we said earlier about you may not have a program by name, but what are you doing that is really making a difference in environmental, social, and governance responsibility? How are you a good neighbor that someone wants in their community?
Absolutely. Yeah. And at the most basic level, I know one of the things that Allison and I talk about, when we're delivering the Employee Volunteer Jumpstart program is managing both the expectations of the company and of the nonprofit, right? And so just because you have a desire to do good doesn't necessarily mean that what you're doing is good, right? And so, it's nice to want to get in and help an organization, but do you know what this organization needs? And can you deliver that? And not in the 3 hours that you want with the lunch hour built in and photo opportunity. So really you're only helping 45 minutes. And helping is not free to the nonprofit. It's not free because they have to use their time and attention to get you and your organization up to speed to help them, right? And so in managing expectations, we don't put the nonprofit on the spot, we do that. Right. And we talk to the company about what it really means to help these different organizations and what they need. And like you said, both of you, Jerome and Toni, what is your mission? What is your company's mission? What do you want to do? And let us help you find a nonprofit that aligns with that rather than just going helter skelter and just, could all not go so well. And we have a question and I believe it's from T. T, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
I think I'm unmuted.
Yep.
So it's so good to see Toni and everyone. So I, as a consumer, certainly believe in my buying power. And I say that I like to shop with good eggs. There are times though when I'm conflicted, and I don't mean to pick on Amazon, but so if you look at Amazon, they don't pay taxes. You hear that their work environments haven't been safe during COVID. They don't pay great wages, yet the service is phenomenal. And so there's that side of the coin, but they also seem to be putting out a big PR campaign about what they're doing in the community. So now when you get the boxes, the wrapper says we've donated gazillions of dollars to different causes. They have Amazon Smile. They've got this big commercial on about in 20 whatever, their fleets are all going to be, you know, net zero. So I'm not quite sure what my question is. It's more like a comment, and, you know, how do you deal with your being conflicted about companies do great stuff, but yet they do bad stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a part of and I'll let Toni and Jerome jump in here, but a part of, and when I talk about managing expectations, it's also doing the due diligence for whomever your client is, be it the nonprofit or the business, and having that information up front, because you don't know what to ask if you don't know what to ask. And if you don't know what to ask, then you don't get all of the information that could possibly be helpful for you. And so that's one of the things, that's where we come in. We've done our due diligence, so we know exactly like what you just said, Theresa, this company gives back and they do great things. And then not bashing anybody, here's their employee record, here's their retention, things like that. That's information that you can give. And so then not steering a company, but rather giving them all information to be able to make an informed decision for themselves, you know, what they want to choose. While inside I might be like, don't choose that one, or yes, choose that one. I'm giving all information for you to make your own decision. You know, how would you answer that, Toni? What would you say about that?
I do think it's important to look at businesses that are actually walking the talk. We used to talk about whitewashing, and now we talk about greenwashing. People who are saying that they're doing things and they're really not. And really understanding what your priorities are. And sometimes there may not be a competitor. You know, if you have to order something and you need it quickly and Amazon's the only place you're going to get it from, then you have to do that. But consumers, as Jerome said, are talking with their wallets. And excuse me. And so if you have that buying power and you can do that, look at competitors, look at who else is out there, what they're doing, look at small businesses, look at community businesses, and what the offerings might be. Really just giving an opportunity to try different things, because Amazon does have great service, but there are other businesses that have great service as well and are doing some of the other things. And when you have an opportunity to have a little bit more time or do a little bit more due diligence, to take that time to do it. Because if you always go to the big name that you know of, it's not going to give the others a chance. And I think those things are going to be coming out more and more, and the companies are not going to be getting away with things the way that they used to. You can look on company websites and look at their sustainability reports, not just their their annual reports, which are very financially driven, but there is a huge push in the investment community from these big companies like Amazon, from the investor side, where they're saying it's not enough. And in fact, there's even a new rule. It's not as tough as some people would have liked it, but the diversity categories will need to be tracked for investment information now, whereas more of the financial things, a number of years ago when they introduced all these financial regulations for companies to make sure that we didn't have another Enron situation. Now, other social types of things are being introduced into business, and diversity being one of them, for so many of the reasons that are obvious in the news right now. And regulation is stepping up, but so are investors. Investors are saying, I don't want to do this. And you can even look in 401k plans. You can look with just what the investors are doing. The major investment corporations and mutual funds are really putting together these portfolios of companies that do responsible business. And interestingly enough, during COVID, those have been the ones that have been more financially successful as well, because people have been sticking with them. And they've also shown that they can pivot more quickly than some of the other more traditional businesses.
Yep. What do you think, Jerome?
I would just say that everything that Toni said, and transparency is incredibly important. I think Theresa and I share a lot of the same sentiment, with what she shared. And what I will say is sometimes what you will see from companies is it doesn't pass the sniff test. And I'm not saying that about Amazon specifically, but I will share one example. This was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and large financial institute, they had some, not only a data breach, but they also had some unethical practices of some of their bank managers, sort of institutionally creating accounts for, against the wishes or unbeknownst to their members who banked with them. And from that whole scandal, this financial institution decided that they would go on a whistle-stop tour of sharing all the good stuff that they have pledged to do in the communities where they do business. And it just wasn't authentic. It wasn't authentic like at all. And I knew that. Other peers that I know in CSR knew that, and I think the general public did as well. Transparency is becoming incredibly important, and not just for the investor community, but also for people like you and I who just might be consumers. There are a couple websites. While there are not a lot of websites that do this, because there are, in my opinion, there's no single universally understood or valued social environmental rating scale, right? So it's almost like you're always comparing apples to oranges, to watermelons to bananas, based on what a specific entity or organization might consider responsible. And you see this, right? You see all these DEI and environmental ratings from Forbes and Diversity Inc. and all these other outlets. But they're not all universally in line with what they believe and how they rank. There is one website that I will share. It's called responsibilityreports.com. And what they do is they aggregate a lot of reports that can be found on company websites. And you can do a search, and they don't have every company known to man on there, but you can go and you can find what companies ESG reports or their annual social impact reports. You can find these things on this website. And what I always tell the consumer is do your own research. And if it doesn't pass a sniff test to you, then don't do it. But transparency is becoming incredibly more important. Publicly stated goals, and then self-accountability, but then also accountability from the public.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that a little bit,
Sure.
Wylea, that some of the major corporations that are doing this on their own are now requiring this from their suppliers. So they know that they can have an impact down the supply chain, and that's going to impact a lot of businesses of different sizes because their major customers are requiring it. And I know one of the major clients that we support is asking all of their suppliers to meet certain standards to make sure that they share values. And they actually are working with an assessment company, which is one of the bigger ones, that all of their suppliers, no matter what size, take this assessment, which then has a database of about 70,000 customers right now. And you can go on, and they have to fill out a very extensive assessment about environmental, social, and governance practices. And they have to prove that they're actually walking the talk. Do they have policies? What's the management system? What happens if there's any kind of a breach? How do they manage the communication to let the customers and community know what's happened? And I think these things are going to become more prevalent because the larger businesses are saying, for example, with greenhouse gases, a lot of the greenhouse gases are what comes from their supply chain, not directly just by running the business. So they're even looking at, well, okay, if I have goods delivered from Amazon or from the local delivery company, how much gas and how much exhaust is being used to have my products delivered to my business. So they're tracking those things. And in that case, it's almost, as opposed to going down the value chain, it goes up the value chain, where someone is saying, okay, you're impacting my number, so I'm going to ask you to report. And that's going to happen more often. And also there's a real trend in the industry to have a central rating system so that people could go in and look at more of these things, because people want to know.
Absolutely. People definitely want to know. We have 2 questions before we do another poll. One question is, how do companies already doing a lot of CSR, already doing a lot in the CSR space, but not currently publicizing it in a way that the customers and community know that they're doing this work? How do they publicize it? And then where do you start?
It's a great question. If I'll give my 2 cents, and I suspect that my 2 cents might be and hopefully differ from what Toni might share. But I think again, it comes back down to authenticity, right? If you're doing CSR work, you certainly want it to be authentic. I think there are a couple different things that you can do. If the company is traditional and very conservative, and they don't want to be viewed as being boastful in what they're doing in the community, then they can have their nonprofit partners share the work that they're doing, right? I think that's a tactic that I've seen some companies take. They will work on a campaign with their nonprofit partner, but instead of pushing out that information from their own marketing channels, which could look inauthentic, they work to assist their nonprofit partners in sharing the collaborative effort from the voice of their nonprofit partners. I have also seen that some companies that are part of like larger membership groups like Points of Light or the International Association for Volunteer Effort, there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, to self-nominate your company for the good work that you're doing with some of these larger convening organizations, because they will also rate you as a nonprofit organization. Points of Light or IAVE, they will rate their membership, their membership companies, and they will also rate other companies who self-nominate in this process. And what that helps to do is that helps lift your company up and your reputational well, if you will, as a company. But with those that also need to understand that you're doing this that you're doing this with authenticity. And it's sometimes better to hear that from a nonprofit partner or a convening organization that has deep roots in a nonprofit community versus going on a massive marketing campaign where you're filling up people's, with 30-minute ad or a 30-second ad space on TV that just might not necessarily come off as you might, as you might want it to come off. And so that's what I would suggest. Is start with your nonprofit partners and start with self-nominations within circles that can truly rate you and advocate for you, but from society's voice first. And I think starting there is a safe place.
Yep. Is there anything you wanted to add, Toni, before we get to the next question?
I would say be visible. It doesn't always have to be in writing or in social media, on the web. If you're visible to your community and your suppliers and your customers, and they know that you are a good neighbor and a responsible business, that word travels, particularly locally. And if you're a small organization, people, word of mouth, saying that you're good to work with, they want to support you, that goes a very long way.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll add.
Go ahead. Jerome.
I'm sorry. And just to add on to that, there are companies that are incredibly visible in the communities that they serve. And I'm going to use a really good example. And I've felt for a long time this is a great example. So as a veteran, I really like to see companies supporting veterans, and Home Depot does a fantastic job at that. They're not incredibly boisterous about what they do, but if you go onto their Twitter channel, you can see all the work that they're doing to support the veteran communities. And so people see that, they recognize it. And when I think about Home Depot, the first thing I think about is veterans and disaster relief, just because of the work that I know that they're doing in the communities. And it's not overt on any sort of like TV advertisement.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
That's
think
a good
Patagonia
example.
is another one. I think pretty much everyone knows what Patagonia stands for, even if you're not someone who buys a lot of outdoor type equipment or clothing from Patagonia.
Mhm.
Yeah, really good examples. Thank you. Our next question before we go to our poll is, do you see any trends in the values that businesses have for their responsibility efforts?
I actually found a campaign that was launched on the 50th anniversary of the essay from Milton Friedman. And most of you are going, what is she talking about? And that's when you know I'm a big geek in this field. Milton Friedman is the person who said the only person that businesses are responsible to are their shareholders. And he wrote that essay 50 years ago this year. And there has been a backlash, particularly this year, saying, oh no, a business owes to all of their stakeholders. The term that's been floating around recently is stakeholder capitalism. So your customers, your community, your employees, they're all part of your stakeholders. If you are a good business, a responsible business, you're not just worried about making money for your shareholders, whether you're a company that directly has stock or indirectly. It's who is invested in your business. And there's actually an organization that was introduced. And if you have a chance, I highly recommend their website because I just think visually it's beautiful. It's called Imperative 21. And it talks about the values that should be important to businesses, that they should be focusing on for corporate responsibility, for sustainability. And what they focus on are a living wage, financial security for your employees and your community, inclusivity and diversity, the environment, making sure that you are a good environmental steward, well-being, the safety and security of your employees and the products that you introduce, gender equality, respect, being fair in the markets that you work in, human rights, and sharing prosperity and wealth. So it falls around, again, the environmental, the social, and the governance, how you manage your business.
Awesome, thank you. Jerome, do you see any trends in the values that businesses have for their responsibility efforts?
Yeah, and I think Toni actually mentioned that really succinctly. And I started grinning when she was mentioning, Milton Friedman and that quote, because I think that quote is something that a lot of people in, responsible business can look at and be like, wow, like we have made like a really big departure in how we're doing business and what we consider responsible. And I think when you look at that quote, and I've seen that quote, and for me, it's a reminder of how far we have gone to understanding what responsible business is. And it just gives me hope that decades from now, we're also looking at responsible business in a much more progressive lens, much more integrated than it is now. And I would say that, things are I think COVID-19 did a couple different things for responsible business. I think it's not just really highlighted the massive disparities socially and environmentally that we're seeing right now that have existed for decades or even centuries, I would imagine. But I think any natural or man-made disaster only accelerates certain things. And I think corporate responsibility has been accelerated 3 to 5 years over the last 6 months. So, the changes in what we consider responsible business have been accelerated 5 years just because of a pandemic. And I think that's like one of the silver linings, if there are silver linings to having a pandemic, is that I think that it's really shifted society's understanding and our philosophical understanding of what responsible business is for both practitioners like Toni and myself, but also for what society is requiring businesses to do. And so, when I think about the next several decades, thinking about where we were with that Milton Friedman quote, where we are now and what is in store for the future gives me a lot of hope.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that. Are we ready for our poll, Allison? And I'll share.
Yes, we
this
sure
on
are. I will go ahead and launch it.
Okay, so we'd love 100% participation. Come on, folks, there's only 21 of us. And our poll question is, have you ever organized in or participated in a day of service? Have you ever organized or participated in a day of service? And if yes, was that day of service successful or not?
All right.
Okay, so 100% of you, 100% of us have participated in a day of service, and 83% said it was successful and 17% said unsure. I'm curious about the unsure.
And I'll be honest, I'm the one who said unsure. I don't know if there's another person. Oh, you said unsure. Okay.
Well, for me, it was yes, successful, but then another one was kind of unsure. But what do you say about that, Jerome?
Well, it depends on what your goals are. And if your goal is to serve the needs of the community that you're supporting, then success is what they deem as success. And if you did not achieve what they needed as an organization, then in my mind, regardless of you're going out there and spending whatever hours you wanted to do, creating whatever tangible item or whatever it is for that nonprofit, if you didn't meet their expectations and what they needed, then in my opinion, you're missing the mark. You haven't really been successful in what you sought out to accomplish. And I think that might differ if you talk to somebody else who works in corporate responsibility, because I think that's also a philosophical question on what is a successful day of service. To me, as somebody who worked at a nonprofit for years, success is whatever the intended goal, the outcome for that nonprofit that you're serving is. It's not how many people you get out in the community and how many hours of service you've amassed, right? To me, that's not success. Success is the outcome that the nonprofit needs. And if you've not met that, then you've not been successful. And while I think that I've been successful in creating a day of service multiple times for thousands of people, I am not 100% confident that I've met the objectives of every nonprofit that we've served. So I can't say without a doubt, yes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I'll ask you all to unmute, not you all, but whoever wants to unmute yourself and give your thoughts on a day of service. You all said that you all participated in or have even coordinated a day of service, but tell us what you think about that. Toni, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I've seen a number of different examples of this, and some successful and some not. And if what you're looking for is something at the end of the day where your volunteers are like, I did such a good job and I can feel good today, and now I can go home and drive my big gas guzzler home and take all of my toys that I have and all my electronics and all these things, but I did something good today, so that's what matters. That's a good thing, and having your employees feel good about something has a lot to do with employee engagement, and I'm not saying that that's not important, but tying to what Jerome had mentioned, there's what you're doing for your employees for employee engagement, and then there's what you're doing for the community. And an example that really strikes me is we had a large group for a major corporation that I work with, and they had about 50 people. They wanted to do something. They had a very specific time frame, and then they had they didn't want to get their hands dirty. They didn't want to have to be so dirty they couldn't go out to lunch afterwards, and these very corporate kind of polished things that they wanted to have built into this. And so we found a project for them that was working with, interestingly enough, this was a number of years ago, working on pandemic planning. And we worked with a local nonprofit and some government organizations in how you would stage a center for when people had to come in and either they needed triage, they were, or they needed food, they needed medical support. They needed housing, and how this would all happen. So we put them through this program, and the nonprofits and the government organization loved it. They thought it was perfect. They got exactly what they needed. They got really good feedback from very professional, very highly educated, involved, engaged people. But unfortunately, the employees were like, it was really boring. You know, we didn't get to build the bicycles, and then at the end have the kids ride their bicycles around the gym and tell us how great we were. So you have to balance that, and that makes it really hard, because employee engagement is definitely important, and I don't want to discount that. So balancing those two things can be very hard.
Uh-oh, Deb has turned her camera on. Deb, did you have something you wanted to share?
I did. I was multitasking. I apologize, but I've worked with a lot of nonprofits, as some of you all know, over the years, and I've had some very, very successful day of services and some very unsuccessful day of services. And it depends on which side you ask. You ask some nonprofits and you say, oh, can you help paint this room? And the painting is so bad, you have to go back and get somebody else to really do it, because the employees are not engaged in it, right? And then you have the other days where, you know, we had to have 50 bicycles put together, and this organization, which is a quasi-government organization, made teams and made a contest out of putting these bicycles together. So I think it's a share. And the people loved it. And of course, these bicycles were all for underprivileged children who needed, you know, who just needed something for the, but I think it also depends on how well it's planned. Theresa's the queen of planning great day of services. So I think it's all depends on how it plans, and it would be wonderful if we ever sat down and just looked at the corporate needs and the nonprofit needs and really made them mesh. But a lot of times corporations are just calling you, oh, come on, we can do something, you know, find us something. And that's not always possible, depending on the charity or the nonprofit. I just throw that out there. You didn't have that on your questionnaire. Well, either or, maybe sometimes, you know, I don't know how to.
That's good. Thank you, Deb. Yes, Theresa. T.
So speaking of days of service, so yesterday I organized a day of service for a transportation company that is all unemployed now because of COVID. And so I think sometimes what's so intriguing to arrange these days of service is that people learn so much. So yesterday, not one person in the group had been to a food pantry before and volunteered. And I mean, I've been volunteering my whole life. And so I have to sort of close my eyes when I hear these things. But it was such a profound experience for them, because they were doing from A to Z, from unpacking things, unloading trucks, to putting packages together, working with clients. And so I think it was such a profound experience for everyone. And, you know, I continue to be confounded about people who think that Montgomery County is so affluent and there's no issue. So I agree with all the comments, and I think just communicating, you know, having the right expectations. And I love just exposing people to all of the different nonprofits that are in Montgomery County, from food security to interfaith clothing to the Button Farm, green projects. And I mean, full disclosure, I was on the Corporate Volunteer Council board for many years, and just absolutely loved that experience.
I just want to add that company that Theresa talks about, the CEO of that company sent me pictures. She was so excited and thrilled for the opportunity that it just went on and on and on and on and on. So Theresa, you may see more from them, and as the economy gets better, I surely would not say that they won't decide to contribute to the organization, because they thought it was so phenomenal. So
And
it's all a work for the companies.
right. And speaking of that, I think what's interesting is, and this honestly was the intent, to get people in to volunteer and provide this desperately needed resource of packing all this food. But yet, what are some skill sets that some of your employees have that the nonprofit desperately needs or could really benefit from everything from IT to, logistics to social media, the whole shebang. So
Right. Yeah, and I
Yeah, I
think
think that's really,
with that comes along, again, that I'm big on managing expectations, right? And somebody put in the chat, that as a nonprofit organization, from their perspective, they have everything that they need, but they sometimes wonder if the company has met their goals. And so in managing expectations, before we start on any of these projects, we talk about what the goal and mission is of the business. And then having that align with and come alongside with the goal and mission of the nonprofit, right? And we talk about the fact that if you're really here to serve the nonprofit, and by extension, the community that nonprofit serves, then here's what's needed. Here's the time that's needed. Here's the attention that's needed. Can you give that? Because if not, then let's try to find something else. Because some companies have, I want to work with Habitat for Humanity, or I want to work with the Wider Circle, and I want to be able to see the people that we're, doing this for. No, we're not parading people out. No, we can't do this. But some nonprofits are like, yes, actually, some of the people who will benefit from this do want to even be alongside. Like sometimes when we're doing days of service at a farm or something like that, right? And so managing expectations, talking about what your goals are up front, bringing everything to the table up front. Right, and talking about, what is necessary on both ends. And so, I feel two ways about these days of service, quite frankly. They can be very impactful, right, for both ends, for the nonprofit and for the business. However, one of the other things that I talk to a business about is the possibility of engaging these nonprofits that you do this one day of service with on a long-term basis, because after this one day, they still need services. Alice and I were talking to Nourish Now yesterday, and we were talking about food insecurity, and how everybody wants to give for the holidays. That's the biggest giving time, between November and December, but then it's crickets in January, right? And so, yes, please do give. They do want you to give. They do need it, but don't forget about them in the lean times. And, we were already food insecure, like you said, T, here in Montgomery County, definitely. In large pockets of Montgomery County. Leadership Montgomery, we have a partnership with M&T Bank in the Kennedy cluster, and we will be serving the 20906 zip code. We'll be serving 200 families, 600 kids, right? So there is a huge need. And there was a huge need before the pandemic, but now with the pandemic, it's the gap, the need is even greater, right? And so, how can we, yes, help them on these days of service, but don't forget that if you contribute in a meaningful way long-term, that you can continue this relationship and, to the point that we all made earlier, put into the bank so that it's not such a long haul, when it's needed again. So you're not starting from scratch. And then Maurice had a question. Maurice, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Oh, no, I was just indicating, that response of why I also selected unsure, just because I think sometimes coming from the perspective of a company trying to change its culture and become more responsible in the community and put together more events, you could do a lot of planning and get things together, but when it comes to the day of an event, if you only have fewer than expected or not as many people show up, you get the work done, you accomplish it for the company. For the not-for-profit perspective, you did complete the task or what was the planned activity, but from trying to get more engagement from your employees, was that successful?
Right. Yeah. And then what that looks like for the company as a whole.
So
I
Maurice,
think long-term,
sorry. Just real quick, as someone who's planned these events for years with companies, I used to get so upset if I didn't have zillions of people volunteering. And then I got to a point where I said, well, if we had a small group and everyone had a great time and we helped the nonprofit and fulfilled the mission, you know, those people had a great day, and hopefully they'll go back to their families and neighbors and fellow employees and say, hey, you know, I had a great time today. You know, I strongly suggest you sign up next time. And they're like, oh, wow, you know, I should have done that instead of going shopping or to the movies.
And that's where a long-term partnership can really make a difference too, because then you can take those word of mouth stories and build upon them for the next time. And I think it's also important in terms of partnership. Building a partnership is so important between businesses and the nonprofits, so that you can really get to know each other and understand each other, and then you can help to meet those goals. You're going to have some employees that want to do a quick short-term thing. They don't, you know, want to get dirty, or they don't want to paint, or they want to have direct service, maybe work with kids or whatever. And then you want to have some that just kind of come in, do some work, don't really have to talk to anybody, and can leave. I did a project with a company that is represented here. I'm sitting in the audience, and we had some people who worked to just organize a place that needed to be cleaned up in Laurel. It's an organization called Bernadette's House, and they needed a room that needed to be organized and clean, and people went in and did that. And then we had the trade shop, who are very skilled tradesmen and construction people, went in and they tore up carpeting and they redid a floor and they put paneling in, and everybody was happy. And that was something that we continue to work with this organization on, because we looked at what the needs were. We could take small groups and bring them in, and it really made a difference. And I think it's okay for all the nonprofits that are on this session to say no. If a company is just saying we want to come in, don't feel like, oh my God, they want to help us, and if we say no, then it's going to hurt our reputation, or they're not going to want to work with us. You have to be honest about what you need, and you have to make sure that it's worth your time, and the return on investment of your time, your staff, all the things that you're going to do are going to be worth it in the end, because employers are going to feel it as well. You're going to have a few people who are going to feel good about patting themselves on the back, but for the most part, they're not going to get much out of it either. So what can you do long term that's going to help you to understand each other? And then both of you can generate ideas and be really innovative about what's going to work for both organizations mutually.
Yeah. Jerome, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that I've always found is really helpful for Marriott International and our long-term partnerships is having shared goals, mutual goals that support both entities. And DC Central Kitchen is, I think, one of those really good examples for us as a company. In pre-COVID environment, you know, we were seeking to hire more employees in hospitality, service, and catering. And DC Central Kitchen, they have a hospitality and catering, they have a culinary job training program for members of the community that were formerly incarcerated, homeless, those living with addiction. And, you know, for us, it was an opportunity to not just give like the monetary contribution or episodic volunteerism, but we were also able to leverage our skills as a company to support the training and the mentorship, and then also the placement of those same individuals into a job that would then help uplift them out of poverty into a job with a working wage, with a foundation. And you know, that's the type of like marriage that is very magical, right? You're not just meeting both the goals, but that's something that supports both our business and members of the community. And those are the type of connections that become very magical. But you know, like Toni said, it's about being more fully integrated and creating those relationships that where there are those shared goals that you guys can both create and collaborate on.
So you think I'd know better by now. Thank you, Jerome. Amy had a comment. Amy, do you want to mute yourself and give your comment? Oops.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, my feeling was, I've been involved with coordinating volunteer events, and when it's something that the nonprofit didn't really have a need, or wanted so desperately to be able to provide the volunteer event for the company or for the sponsor, that they've kind of cobbled some work together, and then you get there and it's so painfully obvious that this was not really a need, that this was really put together out of the nonprofit's need to feel like they were filling the sponsor's need, then it just becomes, it's just embarrassing for everyone when you get there and there's, it's non-essential work, or it's, it's just obvious that there's really nothing going on. It's in everyone's best interest for honesty up front, and for definitely having that conversation of, is this realistic? Please don't put something together just for the sake of flattering our vanity and making us feel like we've been needed. If it's not truly a need, then the fact that it's not genuine becomes very, very obvious. So yeah, definitely having those conversations up front about what the nonprofit can do, what the volunteer organization is looking for, and making sure it's going to be an event that's satisfactory for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Amy. So before we give Toni and Jerome a chance to give any closing comments, we can take any questions or comments that anybody else might have at this time.
I do have one more thing, and that was
Sure.
based on something that Amy said. And I do think it's imperative that the employee, the corporation or company, get thank yous from that nonprofit. I mean, it is so imperative to make sure to say thank you. And it depends on the company. It can be individual, or it can be group, or it can be a certificate, or it can be recognition somewhere. Then I make sure that those companies, the corporations that I work with, recognize even the offer sometime, because you're right, sometimes it just doesn't meet the nonprofit, and it doesn't mean the corporation, but you still have to be grateful for the opportunity that you were willing to work with the company. So thank yous are like tremendously important.
Hey, Wylea, can I build on what Deb just said, because it strikes me. So with my previous employer, we of course had supported the CBC luncheon, and my corporate philanthropy manager was always so impressed by the follow-up that Leadership Montgomery did, outlining the metrics and the report that Dana had created, and that she just was blown away. And my previous employer did a lot of philanthropy, and not that many nonprofits were great at following up. And it's not even the thank you, it's what the impact was, what the metrics were. And so A, I wanted to give kudos to Leadership Montgomery, but B, just kind of reinforce what Deb said, because that is something that really did resonate for my company at that point.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, Kelly. And that it does. It makes a huge I don't know what I was going to say. It makes a huge impact, to have that thank you. It goes back to we hosted something for a friend of mine a while ago, and she sent a handwritten thank you note in the mail. Nobody does that anymore. And it makes an impact, right? And it's you're recognizing my effort, you're thanking me. And exactly what you said about Dana's metrics. I think you get to know what you gave, where it's going, how it's impacting the organization, and then you get to see what everybody did, and maybe it'll make you want to do something more the next year or whatever. But that's not why she sends it out. But it is a big thank you. So thank you for saying that and recognizing that, Kelly and Deb. Thank you. Jerome, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, and this is something I'm sensitive to because I worked in a nonprofit sector. But again, pre-COVID, there were 1.5 million tax-exempt organizations registered with the IRS, and what I would say is, unfortunately, many of them, while they can give a thank you, don't really even have the capacity to sometimes even understand the immediate or long-term outcomes of what their programs do. And I say that because I think not every organization understands their own organizational theory of change, right? They don't know what the inputs, activities, outputs, and the immediate long-term outcomes are. And I think some of that's just because, I mean, let's face it, there are a lot of organizations that are built out of a passion point, but still lack the advanced or the complex nature of running what is a social business for all intents and purposes. And they don't even know their own metrics in some instances, right? Like I am always, and I shouldn't be shocked, but I am always surprised and shocked when I do connect with organizations, even in my private life where I do private consultancy, where they don't even track, they don't really track their inputs, outputs, or outcomes. So they don't even have the qualitative or quantitative data to provide to donors. And so it's something I'm sensitive to. And I think from the corporate responsibility perspective, I bear some responsibility to help my nonprofit partners figure out what those metrics are, if I want them, and if they cannot deliver them immediately. Like there's some responsibility that is on me to help uplift them to that place where they can share that information with us that we then share on our social impact report, or that we share internally with our teams once the event is done. It's not all my responsibility, but it's something I'm sensitive to because I've worked with enough nonprofits to know that some of them don't even track that stuff, and they can't because they're underfunded, understaffed, they don't have enough time. And that's on the responsibility of strategic philanthropy to help solve some of that. And you can't solve some of that if you have a broken fundraising or funding model that exists within the nonprofit sector at large. So those are like really like deep rooted things that I'm talking about. But that's something I'm certainly sensitive to. And I see people nodding their head, but.
Yeah, and it goes to also some of the things that Allison and I talk to nonprofits about. Again, back to managing expectations. We talk to them about metrics and about, some of them have said no, right? To having, I'll come to them and say, hey, there's a business that wants to be in this space and help in this way, and your organization does this and serves this population. And they'll say no, and it's not because they don't have the need, but they don't know how to translate that need into a serviceable project.
I teach a class at Montgomery College, and that Montgomery College class is for people who are interested in beginning nonprofits, and that's one of the key things that I train them on. They're scared of it because not only do you need it for your businesses, but that's how you get a grant these days. You have to have all those things you talked about, Jerome, to even begin to look at somebody who might qualify for a grant. Yep. And they will say to me, and there's a little guy sometimes in this class, maybe one or two people who have started a passion nonprofit, as you say. And my key to them is that you can be passionate, but you need to get somebody who really knows fundraising. Somebody's going to have to take the responsibility and monitor that kind of information. That's how you get money these days, and that's how you continue to get money these days, regardless of whether they're doing a social responsibility activity. You've got to put those input, outputs, everything that's there. So you're so right.
Can I ask a question, get some advice maybe? So there's the metrics and then there's the impact. So how do you measure the impact, say, if you are giving out food and helping people with food insecurity? And so clearly, if you're giving them food, that means they don't have to go to the grocery store, and then they can buy prescriptions or pay a utility bill. Or like I know Kelly Kaplan used to run the Washington Area Fuel Fund, and you're giving someone money to pay their fuel bill so they're not cold. So how is it that those sort of intangible impact things, how do you equate that?
Toni or Jerome, do you want to?
I'll let Toni speak. I think she was gonna, yeah.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking that there are metrics, like you say, like we had this many people that we gave food to, a very specific metric. But I also think that judging impact, measuring impact, comes from stories that are more qualitative than quantitative. And that means you do have to follow up with your clients or your partners, whatever you call the people that you serve, and really help to understand how you've helped them, what you can do to help them better in the future, and then creating that dialogue so that they give you some of those stories. That's one of the things that I find amazing about what Patagonia does. You can go to a particular company and you'll find a sustainability section or a sustainability report, and it will give you, we did this and this metric and that metric and this number, and we've reduced our carbon by this much. And those are really great things. You go to Patagonia and it's all stories. It's all about places that they've been and people that they have met and that they've helped with. And it just impact in a really personal way. And you can spend hours, and it's very frightening to say that I have spent hours in their website reading all of these stories. But I think that really says a lot about what the impact is. And that's what people remember. People don't remember statistics, but people remember stories, and they remember people.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
That's
Thank
really
you, Toni.
That's right.
So Toni and Jerome, as we come to a close, I'd like to just hear your, just a little quick talk about just a summary. We talked about what corporate social responsibility is, the fact that it is still important and why it's still important. You've touched on how people can begin the CSR journey in their organizations, nonprofit or businesses here in Montgomery County. Is there anything, any parting words that you want to leave with our attendees? Jerome?
Yeah, I think the first thing to really, for me to want to really convey and make sure that folks understand this, but the idea of corporate responsibility, or what I would just call responsible business, I think it's something that we can all do, whether we're self-employed or whether we run or own a multi-million or multi-billion-dollar national or global company. I think that responsible business is not exclusive. And I think, if we are going to transform society or the environment, then we need the other 99% of non-corporations to really embrace this. And I think these are things that can be done, that are very tangible, that we can all do in our own personal and professional lives. And so that would be the big takeaway, is that we can all do this to varying degrees, and it's not just exclusive to corporations.
Yeah, thank you, Jerome. Toni?
Yeah, I think that organizations need to look at where they are and who they are, what are their values, what are the things that are important to them, and then what are important to the people that matter to them, their customers, their community, their employees, and start with where you are, and let people know about it, because people care, and that's going to help your organization. It's going to help you to partner in the community, and it's going to help you to make a difference.
Absolutely. Thank you both very much. Thank you all for being here. Toni and Jerome, just thank you so much. You've given a lot of really, really good information. Thank you for everybody also providing some of your input, Deb and T. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I do want to mention that this has been recorded, is being recorded, and so will be available on our YouTube channel. Carmen? Yep, Allison says yes. So thank you all very much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.